Let's make a hazelnut vanilla tart, which is honestly a classic any time of the year, but is especially perfect as we start looking towards fall and thinking about richer fall flavors. I am going to start off, I already made my tart shells. You can check out my first tart video if you want the recipe and tutorial for that. So now I'm going to work on the fillings, starting with a hazelnut financier. Financier is going to have a brown butter, which is one of the reasons why it pairs so well with the rich nutty flavor of hazelnut, and then vanilla and the creamy white chocolate we are also going to add in here. So if you've never made a brown butter before, you literally just put your butter into a small saucepan, leave it there, allow it to melt, stir it around a couple times, keep an eye on it. It is going to start bubbling, start boiling after it is completely melted, and then pretty soon after that, it will begin to brown, and you will notice these little brown particles developing at the bottom of your saucepan. As soon as the butter begins to brown, that transition of regular butter into brown butter happens quite quickly. So do keep an eye on it, do be a bit careful, and if you keep this on the heat for very long, you can go from having a really lovely light brown butter into burnt butter very, very quickly. So do be a little bit cautious. You can continue to swirl this around, stir in there, develop a darker brown butter or a little bit more of those brown butter bits in there. But as soon as you notice the color sort of shifting, you do want to take it off the heat and pour it into another container. We do want this to be still a liquid when we use it in the financier, but we also want it to be a little bit cooled down. We don't want to add this boiling butter into our mixture. Now that the brown butter has had a little bit of time to cool, I'm talking like 15-20 minutes, I'm going to get into the batter, which is so easy. I'm adding all of my dry ingredients, including hazelnut flour. I've got some other flour in there, some powdered sugar. I'm going to quickly mix that together with a paddle attachment. You could also sift it, but because I know that this is a relatively small batch and it is all, it's not so clumpy, I'm not so worried about that. Then I'm adding in some egg whites and honey into my dry ingredients. I'm going back in there with my paddle attachment and mixing this together. After this is nice and emulsified, all of the dry ingredients are now moist, then I'm going to start streaming in my brown butter, and I will continue to mix this until it is looking nice, a little bit lighter, a little bit fluffier, and really well and thoroughly emulsified. Now that hazelnut financier batter is looking great, I'm going to transfer it into a new container, slap some plastic wrap on the top of that, and get it into my refrigerator for at least 30 minutes. Otherwise, you can make this a day or two before and just leave it in your refrigerator until you are ready to use it to fill your tart shells. Another component for this tart shell that does need time to rest in your refrigerator is a whipped white chocolate ganache. It is really basic and simple, but incredibly delicious. So I am going to start off here with some white chocolate, and I'm pouring a little bit of my cream into a small saucepan with my vanilla. I'm basically creating a ganache here, and then while I'm doing that, I also want to be blooming my gelatin. I'm using sheet gelatin. If you are using sheet gelatin, make sure to bloom it in really ice cold water and then squeeze out all of the excess so you don't have too much extra moisture. And once that's done, we're ready to get started. I do have some additional cream. It is cold. You can leave that in your refrigerator till you're ready to use it. And that is important for making a whipped ganache. When you heat anything, a cream, whatever else, you do slightly change the texture and consistency of it. And for a whipped cream, ideally we are not going to heat up all the cream, which is why this is divided up into two different parts. I am then adding my bloomed gelatin into the warm cream, making sure that completely dissolves before I pour it over my chocolate. As I said, we're basically starting off with a normal ganache, so I'm just going to mix my chocolate and that warmed cream, vanilla, and gelatin all together. Now here is where this recipe shifts into being something that becomes much more of a whipped ganache and will become really easy for us to whip later on when we're ready. I am going to pour in my cold cream. You can start off just by using your whisk, but I really recommend getting in there with your immersion blender for the best results texture wise. The one thing you do want to look out for here, though, you do want to use an immersion blender while you add in your cold cream. You do not want to start actually whipping this. We want to whip it right before we're ready to use it. So as soon as this is incorporated, get it into your refrigerator. This needs at least 3 hours to sit because of that gelatin. So leave it there and then we'll be ready to use it later in the day or the next day. The last step we need to prepare is a really simple hazelnut vanilla praline. First, I'm roasting my hazelnuts. I am going to use a kitchen towel just to take off some of the skins because that can be a little bit bitter and it can also change the color and sometimes the consistency of the praline. But I'm not super worried about getting every single little bit of skin off. As you can see, the hazelnuts have become a really nice, rich golden brown color. And so now that I have those ready to go, I'm adding in some vanilla bean pods. This is just remnants from when I have previously scraped out all of the seeds from my vanilla bean. Otherwise, you can use vanilla bean that is really hard and dried out if you're looking for another way to use it up or give it some new life. With the toasted hazelnuts and vanilla bean sitting off to the side at the ready, I am going to create a dry caramel with all of my sugar. Remember, when you're creating a dry caramel, unless you have a really ginormous saucepan you're using, it's best to add just a little bit, allow that to melt, and then continuously add a little bit of sugar. You can get in there with a spoon or a small whisk to stir things around, but if you add too much sugar at once, it can be much harder to create a dry caramel. Either what is on the bottom might start burning before everything's incorporated, or if you have everything in there at once or you pour too much in, it might sort of shock the temperature and you might have to continuously remelt things that have already caramelized. So just make sure to add in small additions until everything is finally melted completely and caramelized. As soon as everything is completely ready, it's a really dark golden color, then I'm going to pour it over my hazelnuts. make sure to transfer the caramel as soon as it's looking a really nice deep amber color over the hazelnuts quite quickly, as if you leave it on the heat, it can start to burn and overcook. It can become quite bitter. And also, if you are a little bit too slow in pouring it over the top of the hazelnuts, once it's off the heat, it can also start to cool down quite rapidly, and it can become a little bit hard to pour it over the hazelnuts evenly. So you want to really be focusing at this stage. If you are attempting to film it like I am and you are doing that by yourself, it can be especially tricky, so please be careful. Now I want to let that sit just at room temperature until the caramel is completely cool, and then we are going to turn it into a praline. Now we are finally done with all of our elements. Everything has rested and cooled, all of that. So here we go into building our tarts. This financier batter has been in my refrigerator now for about a day. So I'm transferring that to a piping bag, and I want to pipe a layer about halfway up my pre-baked tart shell. As you can see, my tart shell is just barely baked through. It is not golden brown. It is not really dark in color. And that is because I know I want to bake my financier batter in the tart shells. And as the financier bakes, the tart shell will continue baking as well. So we do want this to bake evenly and have a really nice golden color, both on the financier and on the tart shell. The next step we need to do to finish these tart shells is make our praline paste. So I am going to break up this ginormous slab of hazelnut and sugar, transfer everything over into my food processor. I have this tiny, very weak food processor, and it still does the trick, so you shouldn't have any problem. Just continue to pulse and mix the hazelnuts and sugar and vanilla until a paste forms. If you have been doing this and holding that button for more than 5 minutes and it isn't coming together, try adding grapeseed oil in very small amounts. Like I'm talking like a teaspoon at a time or even less. And that should help everything combine and emulsify completely. After your paste forms, that is done. It's really simple to create praline at home. You can transfer that to a piping bag or into another bowl, however you prefer to get it into your tart shell. The very last thing we need to do is deal with our whipped ganache, which, as you can see, that gelatin and the chocolate have cooled down and they have set up. But because of all of the cream, it is still soft enough and malleable enough. This is going to be lovely. So I'm transferring all of that whipped ganache into the bowl of my KitchenAid. I have my whisk attachment, and I'm going to whip this to about a medium stiff peak. In the beginning, because the whisk is breaking up the structure of the gelatin, it does loosen up quite a bit, and the only thing you want to look out for is not to whip it too much. You do not want a really stiff peak on this, or it will look a little bit broken or overmixed. I have a pedal tip on my whipped ganache, and then I am ready to go. So the reason I only filled my tart shells about halfway with the financier is because I wanted to have a really nice thick layer of the hazelnut praline, and then right on top of that I am going to go in with my bag of whipped ganache and just go back and forth to create this really lovely classic pattern on the top of this tart. You could use a St. Honoré piping tip, which is going to be a little bit wider at the base. However, I do not love that shape for a piping tip, so I prefer to use a pedal tip for this method of piping. If you have never tried this style of piping before, honestly, it is so easy. Just with any slightly teardrop or petal shaped piping tip, make sure the wider, fatter end is at the bottom, and then just go back and forth kind of carefully, but also you don't want to go too slowly or you might end up with some sort of wiggly lines. Once your praline is in the tarts, once your whipped ganache is on top of the tarts, you can pipe it any way you want. You can add some finishing decorations. Personally, I really like to go in with some halved or chopped hazelnuts. Again, I just toasted those. At the same time, I took a couple out when I was making the praline. And then what are you going to do but add some gold leaf? It is classic French patisserie style of dessert here, going in with some gold leaf. You do not have to do that, but I wanted to go for kind of a simple and classic tart, so I felt like it was a really great addition. This style of tart between the whipped ganache and the praline in there, the financier, all of that, this is a tart that you can keep in your refrigerator and it should keep up to 2 or 3 days. Whipped ganache has a relatively short shelf life compared to a lot of other desserts, and the longer you keep this, the more and more dried out the top of the tart that whipped ganache is going to become. And you may notice that both the whipped ganache and the financier even might start pulling away from the tart shell. It might have a bit of a gap, and also the longer all of this is in your refrigerator, the more moisture the tart shell and financier will absorb. So definitely try to create this and then enjoy it within that same day or up to, I would say, 3 days later. I hope you love this look at this kind of classic, simple vanilla hazelnut tart. It is very delicious, so many textures. I really, really love it, and I hope you give it a try. If you do, tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see your end results. Thanks for joining me today here for this tutorial. I am so excited to share more pastry tutorials, so I will see you in the next video. Until then, have a wonderful day. Bye!